had a question come through, another question, which is just fabulous. I'm so glad that, you're sending questions through to me. It's terrific. And the question is it's come from a lady who's been in a relationship for a long time. And she said to me, I really love my partner, love my husband, but we lack romance. And she's complained to him about it many times and just hasn't had the response from him that she would have liked. She said, he kind of acknowledges that the relationship lacks that spark, but he just doesn't change anything. And the person that wrote me the question wants to know, is there any hope? And I never like to be the bearer of bad news, but when there's issues in a relationship, in order for the relationship to be worked on, both parties need to be able to acknowledge that there's an issue. And if one person acknowledges it and the other person doesn't, then it makes it really difficult to work on. So you're really in a space where you can kind of ask, and then if nothing changes, it really becomes something that you either accept or continue to work on by yourself in the hope that your partner will see things differently. It's a really hard one to answer in a positive way because, unless your partner really recognizes there's a problem, it's you just don't get that shift. Often I see couples, and I've been a couples therapist for 10 years, and what would happen is that one party would be asking for something, and they might ask for it for a really long time, and maybe it's the way they're asking for it, maybe it's the words they've used, or maybe they haven't been clear in what they've asked for. But often what happens is the couple ends up in therapy, and the person that's been asking will say, look, I've been asking for this for 5 years. I've been upset for 5 years, and now I've got nothing left, and I feel like, the relationship is ending. And the other party will say, but why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say? So something I can say is, if you feel as though your husband or your partner isn't understanding, perhaps it can be because of the way you're asking. And if you do feel really strongly that this is a no line, this is a do not pass go, do not collect $200 kind of thing, then you need to be really clear that you tell your partner that. If it's not, and your partner doesn't think that there's going to be a consequence, that he's not going to lose you, then maybe maybe why he's not doing anything. And so when you get to that space where there's a threat the relationship may end, that's when, he may take some action. The sad thing is that I see in couples therapy is by the time couples get to me for therapy, it's often too late, and the relationship may well end. And what's very sad is that the person who did it'll be fine, I don't have to change, in response to their partners asking for difference, suddenly finds themselves in a place where it's too late to do anything. So maybe, I don't know. Hi, Diane, how are you? So maybe, that's helpful to you in terms of understanding. If I kind of go over my waffle again and explain it, maybe understanding that if your partner doesn't see that there's a problem with not having romance in your relationship, then it can be difficult to expect that there'll be any shift in or change in behavior from him. Then there's the side of the way you're communicating. And if you're communicating it in a way that isn't a case of, well, if you don't change, then this relationship isn't able to continue, then, if you're not communicating it like that, and sometimes you need to, especially if, this is a group for women, so I know I can speak openly, especially if you're talking to blokes, sometimes they need that push. And they need to understand that if things don't change, you won't stay. Having said all of that, the very worst thing you can do in a relationship is threaten to leave and then not carry through. So if you want a shift in your relationship and you say, if you do not do this, I will leave you, and then they don't do it and you don't leave, then you basically create empty threats. So always, which then means that when you do finally say you're going to go, your partner's not going to believe you because you've cried wolf too many times. So just keep that in mind as well. So that's my answer. Now, one of the things that the person said in this question was, I've tried really hard. I know that there's 5 love languages and all of that, which kind of indicated to me that she didn't want me to talk about the love languages again. And I've tried really hard and nothing changes. Now, something I would say is if you want to teach your partner how you want them to treat you, then you need to treat them in the way you want them to treat you. And if your partner's in a space where they're not giving anything back, then you really need to be in that headspace of thinking, well, I'm doing this without expectation of anything coming back, in the hope that there'll be a shift. And this person who wrote me the question made very clear that they love their partner. So maybe, you do this with a sense of goodwill in the hope that perhaps maybe one day, he'll get the message. Now, I am going to talk about love languages, and I know the person that wrote this letter is very nervous about confidentiality, so I'm being very careful, and anyone that writes to me and asks the question, I will be very careful not to say who has sent the question in. Did say that, the sense I got, they didn't want to hear about love languages, but I thought I would talk about them anyway, because I'm mindful that there'll be some people watching this video who don't know about love languages. So love languages are basically one of those things that every couples therapist learns about and says, why didn't I think of that? Because it's a pretty simple concept and very, very powerful in relationships. Now, Gary Chapman, who wrote the book, The 5 Love Languages, that is a zillion selling book, and he's made a lot of money, and he's written the love languages for your kids and your pets and everything else. It's a really simple concept. So the concept is that there are 5 love languages. So there is physical touch. Now, Gary Chapman would say that's sex. I would say no, that sex kind of sits quite separately, that physical touch is actually holding hands. Sorry about that, I just had a silly phone call come through. Touching them, that kind of thing. So it's that holding hands and that tactile, connection in the relationship. So physical touch, time together. And time together can mean different things to different people. And this is where people get quite caught up. So some people might think time together was we all went out as a family and we went on a picnic. And time together to another person might be like, well, no, that doesn't mean time together. Time together actually means time you and me talking together and spending intimate time together. So time together, so physical touch, time together, gifts. And gifts don't have to be expensive. I remember one client sitting with me and saying, he hasn't even bought me a card. So time together, gifts, and they don't have to be expensive. It can be a flower from the garden. It's that token in the relationship that shows love. The next one is words. So words of affirmation is a really, really important one. So how you speak to one another is really, really important. I've actually written these down because I've had a bit of a mental block about them. So I've said words, how you speak to one another is very important. So if you're having an argument and you're tearing strips off one another, if someone's love language is words, then that's going to cut very deeply for them. So words, physical touch, gifts. Oh, the last one I always forget, acts of service. So acts of service sounds terrible, doesn't it? Acts of service is doing things for each other. So some people demonstrate their love by making you a cup of tea, vacuuming the floor, helping you fix something. So acts of service is your fifth one. So you've got words, physical touch, gifts, time together, and acts of service. So there's 5. Now, all of us have a preferential love language. So one love language that we prefer above all others. And if you and your partner have the same love language, then you naturally speak the same love language. So it makes the connection in your relationship really easy. But if you have different love languages, it's a bit like one of you speaking Chinese and the other one speaking Italian. Because if you're, say for example, your love language is acts of service, you're making him a cup of tea to tell him how much you love him, but he really wants physical touch and he's crying out for you to give him a hug. So what can be very helpful in a relationship is if the two of you can understand each other's love language. Now, Gary Chapman has a test on his website, and I believe, I haven't looked it up, but I believe his website is garychapman.com. If you Google 5 love languages, then you'll be able to see the love language, do the love languages test and discover each one, you and your partner's love languages. And then the trick is not to speak your own. You're going to speak your own love language anyway, but to speak your own love language and a little bit of your partner's. So if you know your partner's love language is physical touch, well, you need to give him a bit of a hug. And if he knows your love language is acts of service, then, you know, he needs to make you a cup of tea. So can you see how if there isn't that connection in the relationship to recognize that you both need to work on the romance or the connection in the relationship, how one person could be, you know, speaking a whole lot of love language, and if the other person isn't reciprocating, how difficult that could be. So that's love languages. Very, very interesting. Gary Chapman would have us believe that that's all you need and your relationship will be fine. And that isn't quite the case, but it is a very powerful tool that you can use in building connection in your relationship. So I think I've kind of answered the question about lack of romance in the relationship that the person has written to me with, which was just so lovely to receive that email. So, you know, it's really important that the two of you recognise that there is a problem in the relationship. And if one person doesn't recognise there's a problem, then it makes it very difficult. If you would like me to answer your relationship question, and I answer relationship questions sort of in 2 ways, depending on where I'm at and what I'm doing. So there is the, you can email me at support@elizabethroebuckjones.com.